Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning scoop presented by the Arizona Capital Times. This morning, our topic is Arizona's roadmap to clean energy. We have a distinguished panel of guests, starting with Dan Steller, State Director of the Nature Conservancy, Arizona, Maren Mahoney, Director of the Arizona Office of Resiliency, and Steve Zylstra, who is President and CEO of the Arizona Technology Council. And I'm Steve Goldstein, acting as moderator and host this morning. We're going to try to get into a lot of topics in the course of an hour. Dan, let me start off with this. When it comes to clean energy, climate-related work, what would you call Arizona's current position? What sort of state are we in right now?
Yeah, great. Good morning, Steve, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining. Really looking forward to the discussion. So I think when we think about climate change, what we really see is that it's not an academic issue. It's not a threat in the distant future. We're really right now at an inflection point in history. And the science shows us very clearly, we have years and not decades to take on some of these challenges that we're seeing right now related to climate change. And unfortunately, in some ways, we're seeing a lot of these examples of the impacts of climate change are very present for us in Arizona. Extreme heat, historic drought, destructive wildfires. These are all challenges that we're really seeing in a very present way in front of us in Arizona. So I think given all of that, it's really imperative that we transition to a clean energy economy as quickly as possible. You mentioned that I'm with the Nature Conservancy, and we really believe that clean energy and a thriving economy need to move together. The types of enduring climate solutions at scale that we need have to be those that also really benefit our state's economy. And if I can, I'll just give a real quick example of that from some of our research. And this one I think is appropriate this week because it's related to urban heat, which is of course very much on our minds here in the Phoenix area this week. So we've done a study and we see really clearly that if left unchecked, urban heat could cost just the Phoenix metro area over $2 billion in a typical year by 2050. What we also know, though, is that there's cost-effective solutions to that. So one, for example, planting desert-adapted trees in appropriate places is a cost-effective solution. The benefits outweigh the costs by a factor of nearly 4-to-1. So we know there are solutions that benefit the economy and can help us tackle climate and clean energy. Stepping back, I think Arizona, very broadly, is really well positioned to address climate challenges. Talk a lot about this. We have abundant solar potential, of course, and Steve is here, and we can talk a lot about the innovation economy in the state with EV and battery manufacturing. So we're really well positioned as a state to, I think, have a lead role in some of these climate-related challenges. And then the very last thing I'll just say on this is that it's also really important to know that, kind of contrary to popular belief, there's a fair amount of consensus around these issues. Most Arizonans support expanding the state's use of clean energy. So we did a survey in 2021, and nearly 80% of Arizonans said clean energy was important to them, and 2/3 said they're concerned about climate change. So I think there's a lot more public and political will than we might sometimes be led to believe on this topic.
Obviously, I want Maren and Steve to comment on this. But Dan, before we get to that, and you mentioned some of this with some of the polling work you've done, obviously, we've all heard of the Nature Conservancy, but what sort of leader has the Nature Conservancy been in this space, and is that leadership growing?
Yeah, well, thanks, Steve. So yes, Nature Conservancy is the world's largest and most impactful conservation organization. I think probably many people are familiar with us. Our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And as I kind of alluded to before, something somewhat unique about the Conservancy is that we really look for solutions that benefit both nature and people. So again, we know that enduring conservation solutions have to work for people as well. And we have 2 overall organizational priorities, which are tackling climate change, combating biodiversity loss. So very much for us, we know that by being such a large and impactful conservation organization, our climate work has grown in the last few years, and we know that it has to be really front and center as we address a range of challenges that we're seeing. We support the rapid deployment of clean energy in the US to address our climate imperative. And I'll just, if I can briefly, one I think area where we've expressed or demonstrated a lot of leadership is a study we did called Power of Place West. And what we did here is we looked across the entire Western United States, and we wanted to ask and answer questions such as how much clean energy will really be required to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, then how much land area and ocean area will that require? And then we also wanted to understand, can we do that in a way that protects sensitive natural areas and supports communities and working lands? And kind of incredibly, no one else had really done any assessment like this before. So this was very innovative work that the Nature Conservancy did. And what we demonstrated really clearly, we did a lot of very sophisticated modeling in this, and we showed, I think, very clearly that across the West, even if we're very restrictive and we really only focus on places that are most appropriate for siting of renewable energy infrastructure or transmission, for example, there is more than enough available space to meet all of our clean energy needs. But that's not going to happen automatically. We're going to need to be very thoughtful about this transition. We're going to need to really plan this and map it accordingly, because the scope of it is large. And so doing this right will be critical, both to getting clean energy solutions and renewable energy deployed at scale quickly enough, and also to avoiding conflicts with natural areas or with communities. And then, Steve, the last thing I'll just say really quickly on this topic about the Nature Conservancy's role is, I think a lot of times when we talk about addressing climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, people think about policy solutions. How can we transition to electric vehicles, and all these things are critically important. We'll talk a lot about them today. Nature Conservancy is actively involved and has a leadership role in a lot of these discussions. But what sometimes gets left out is that there's really a critical role for using nature to reduce or store greenhouse gas emissions, sometimes referred to as natural climate solutions. Great example for us in Arizona is forest protection, restoration, and management. By doing those things better, we can have tremendous climate benefits. And we've done a lot of the science to show the carbon benefits of this as well. And, I think it's easy to say, well, I'm the guy from the environmental organization. Of course, I'm going to talk about natural climate solutions. It's just kind of a niche thing, but it's really not. What we've shown globally is that these natural climate solutions are actually going to be essential for us to meet our societal goals. So if we look at the Paris Climate Accords, of course, the very aggressive, the very now realistic 2030 goals that we have, and we say, what are the emission reductions needed to get there? We can get fully 1/3 of those from nature-based solutions. So having those as part of the discussion is not just kind of nice to have, but we would say a really critical piece as well.
Steve, I'm sure you're champing at the bit, but I want to go to Marion, because I want to talk about some of the things related to funding. We know that some of these things will be, because these are daunting tasks, and this is not something Arizona could do on its own. And of course, there are federal incentives. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, as specific as you can get, as it relates to IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, or the IIJA, how important some of those federal incentives are, and maybe other incentives that Arizona could be involved in, and what some of the goals might be there, and how important some of that funding may end up being.
Classic, huh? Good morning, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. I just want to, before I address your excellent multi-pronged question, I wanted to just say, Daniel, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. We have, and I'm very excited, I think I'll get into this a little bit later, but about the partnerships, and we can't do the work unless we have these partnerships in place, and partnerships with these strong leading organizations like the Nature Conservancy and the Arizona Science Technology Council. So I just want to say thank you for that. And so, to your question, Steve, we have, we are seeing a lot of extreme weather right now, and this is sort of the moment. And I have to say, a lot of this work is going to be about preparation for the long-term Arizona's future, risk reduction, and also looking at how to, optimizing a lot of the benefits for Arizonans all throughout Arizona that will come from these federal funding dollars. And so the federal funding packages are a total game changer at this moment in time, and they really did come at a very critical point in history. It's been less than a year since it was passed into law, and already we the United States is seeing over 142,000 clean energy jobs that have been created. And a lot of these jobs are as electricians, mechanics, technicians. These are good paying, stable jobs that can't be offshored. And then here in Arizona, we have over 12,000 new clean energy jobs already. And we are actually the top state in the country for new clean energy jobs for communities of color. That brings me to a point that the federal infrastructure funding opportunities really emphasize the importance of equity in the benefits, and Governor Hobbs, absolutely, this is central to Governor Hobbs's administration in Arizona for everyone. So we're really pleased that it aligns so well with Governor Hobbs's administration. So when Governor Hobbs got into office earlier this year, she prioritized bringing those federal dollars to Arizona because, yes, these funding opportunities, the bill was passed less than a year ago, but then it's up to each state to actually go after those dollars and pull them into their state. And for some of those funding opportunities, if we don't pursue those dollars, they will be sent to other states. So it's kind of a competition too. And so in just our first few months, the Governor's Office of Resiliency has already applied for over $50 million in federal grant funding, and we're in the process of applying for millions more. I think that it's quite a feat, if I can pat my team on the back, because we're a very small group and we just started. Governor Hobbs began the Office of Resiliency in February. So, we got into the office on day one, and we just have been going at full force. So some of those funding opportunities that we are pursuing, I can get into, is $7 million for grid resiliency from the Department of Energy for this year. About $153 million in rebates. Some of those rebates are going to go towards energy efficiency savings, and some of those rebates will go towards high efficient electrification appliances. So like your induction stove and heat pumps. And that is actually, that's its own, it's a lot of money, right? So we are right now preparing to put that program together, and we envision that being available for consumers in early 2024. We're also establishing an energy efficiency revolving loan fund for energy efficiency measures. This is something that some other states have. Arizona does not at the state level, and so we're excited to initiate that. And then we're also pursuing energy efficiency and conservation block grants, which will go towards small towns and tribes that were ineligible to receive those funds directly from the Department of Energy. And I'll say that does not include all of the hard work that the state agencies and the local governments have been doing to pursue these funds. We've seen incredible leadership at the state agency and the local government level, which is very exciting. I'll just give an example of something we were supporting the Department of Transportation to plan for and implement a statewide network of electric vehicle charging stations. And this is referred to as the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. That's going to be over the course of 5 years, and the state is set to receive a little bit over $76 million to establish publicly accessible charging stations along Arizona's interstate highways. That's a really exciting program. We're really thrilled to support ADOT and as they go after those funds. I think maybe I'll stop there. I probably delved into a few, and I think those are honestly just a few of the opportunities that we're pursuing.
I think we'll return to some of those later on in the conversation. Thanks, Mary. Steve, thanks for being patient. Yeah, go ahead. Want to jump on that?
I want to say, first of all, It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Look forward to the discussion today. A couple of things that both Daniel and Maren said I want to comment on. That statistic around the number of jobs created for people of color. We're one of the leaders or the leader in the country in that category. 91% of those folks, those jobs were people of color in Arizona, which is pretty incredible. The other thing I wanted to say about the Nature Conservancy is they're a great collaborative partner. They have pulled stakeholders together while they were doing this incredible modeling that they were talking about, and it included really everyone, the private sector, the public sector, the universities, the utilities, and so everyone had a chance to weigh in. And this sort of map of the future that they've laid out all the way to 2050 is really incredible. And, it shows the different types of fuels we'll be using over time, including hydrogen. And as you know, Arizona has put a proposal in to be one of the hydrogen hubs. So the Nature Conservancy has been a really great partner for a very long time.
Steve, this is a space that you're very familiar with. You've been a leader of the Arizona Technology Council for a number of years. There was concern for a very long time, and I think this has changed a bit, certainly over the past decade or so, that Arizona's economy wasn't diversified enough. What sort of role has clean energy, climate-related work, how has that affected Arizona's economy, and what do you expect going forward? Will it continue to be a real strong point for the state's economy?
Well, our journey really started with Arizona Corporation Commission passing what they called REST, which was Renewable Energy Standard and Tariff. And it dictated that the utilities must generate 15% of its power from clean sources by 2025, which is just around the corner. You may know that there were attempts to increase that considerably that were unsuccessful, but industry's moving forward nonetheless. As you point out, we've really diversified our economy over the last 10 years, particularly around technology and manufacturing. And that is going to continue in a very robust way going into the future. There are hundreds of companies in the pipeline right now looking at Arizona to relocate. And again, they tend to be technology or manufacturing based. Some of them are what the economic developers call mega projects. What's happened in industry that's really helped to facilitate this growth of clean energy across the nation, and especially here in Arizona, is companies, shareholders, and employees are demanding that the companies that they work for care about these kinds of things. As you know, almost every major company in the country has now created ESG positions, which stand for environmental, social, and governance. And so there's a focus within the company on these things. And many of the companies are attempting to go to zero carbon by some date, and oftentimes way before the federal government has dictated. I have a couple of companies, I won't mention names, that run data centers that have stakes in the ground in 2025 and 2027 to be at zero carbon. A lot of the major companies that moved here over the course of the last 10 years, companies like Apple and Google and Meta and Microsoft have demanded that 100% of their energy come from clean sources. So in a way, the private sector is creating this considerable demand for clean energy. So, we've seen the utilities also sort of turn the corner in the last 5 to 7 years and focusing much more attention on clean energy. They've always had solar programs of some nature over time, but as Maren said, the IIJA and the IRA are providing funding. You heard the amount that's available for creating a more resilient grid nationally. The other thing that's happened here is we're building a clean energy industry. First of all, I'll talk about e-mobility. We now have 5 electric vehicle manufacturers in the state with Lucid, Nikola, Zevex, Electromechanica, and now New. And they're now going to be supported by 4 new battery operations, 2 in Phoenix and 2 in Tucson. You've heard about the massive investment by LG in Queen Creek, by Core Power and Buckeye, Scion and American Battery down in Tucson. And then very importantly, we now have 2 lithium-ion battery recycling companies in the state, sort of creating this circular economy around electric vehicles. Li-Cycle is in Gilbert, and there has been a recent announcement of another battery recycling facility in Casa Grande, I believe. So industry has played a very important role in this drive. I think that what's really elegant about the IRA is it's different than any other piece of legislation that any other country in the world has passed around climate change and global warming, in that it's all incentive based. It's not, it's the carrot, not the stick. Almost every other country, there are consequences for not doing the right thing. In this country, the incentives are so significant that you'd be crazy not to do the right thing. Marion has talked about some of those incentives, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's reinforcing the grid. All aspects of the energy sector are being invested in. We just heard about Core Power's loan from the U.S. Department of Energy, $850 million to support the plant out in Core Power's plant out in Buckeye. So these 2 pieces of legislation are critical to our future. And I want to mention the IIJ, the NEVI program is really going to be critical too. We've got, if we're going to grow a e-mobility industry here in Arizona, we've got to have the charging infrastructure. And that piece of legislation will put charging stations every 50 miles on all the interstates and state highways. And there'll be 4 of them, and they'll all be quick charge. And one of the things that people worry about with charging is whether they're going to work or not. The reliability of these chargers has to be like 99% or something like that. So that'll make a big difference as well.
Those are great points. And I intended to go a different direction, but if we could spend a minute or 2 on what Steve said about carrot versus stick. I don't know if Dan or Marion, you want to comment on that. I find that really fascinating. The idea that when it's incentive based, it almost feels like there are fewer arguments to be made against it if it's all about improving yourselves and then going on and benefiting from it that way. Does that feel as unique as Steve made it out to be, guys? Whichever one of you wants to go ahead, Grant.
I'll just jump in briefly. Yes, Steve's spot on. It is a unique way of doing this. Steve mentioned the renewable portfolio standard, which is a regulation. And now we're looking at incentivizing, and basically this transition is going to be heavily, we need capital. It's a very capital intensive transition. And that's what this is. This gives us that starting point and that push to get it really rolling and to supercharge that transition. So I agree. It's a really neat way of doing things, and it's a really great opportunity. And like Steve said, you'd really be working against your own interests if you weren't going after these funds, or your state's interest if you weren't. So
Dan, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And I mean, I can maybe just say a little more anecdotally from our perspective. That's very much, of course, in line with how the Nature Conservancy works too, and and that it's more about collaboration and finding common ground and building partnerships. So it's I think that's very much in line with kind of our organizational DNA. But anecdotally, what we're certainly seeing is just we always have quite a few organizations and especially corporations that want to work with us. And now we're seeing, just an even greater increase in what this funding. One of the things this funding has done is just create, I think, a lot more opportunities for partnerships across the board, certainly with NGOs like ourselves, with corporations, with public sector entities. It's that incentive-based approach is really creating lots of opportunities for partnerships.
Well, so can we spend just a couple of minutes, not too long, on public-private partnerships? You've all sort of talked about that to some extent. That's why this panel is so great, because you're all coming at it from a diverse point of view in terms of what your roles would be. Steve, let me start with you briefly on that. Then I want to have Dan and Maren comment on that before we move on to something else. The public-private partnerships are obviously important in many ways, but specifically when it relates to Arizona's clean energy future, how big a role is that going to play?
Well, I think it's throughout every aspect of both of these programs. I'll just give an example. We talked about the NEVI program. So, federal funding comes to the Arizona Department of Transportation. The Arizona Department of Transportation does the plan for where these charging stations will be, sets the standard. The private sector will manufacture and install those recharging stations, and they have a 10% stake. So the federal government is only providing 90% of the funding. 10% of it actually has to come from the private sector themselves, from the companies that are participating in these programs. So that's just one example, but generically speaking, a lot of the aspects of the IRA program require matching funds. And those have to either be generated by the state, put in the budget, or provided by the private sector. So it automatically creates these public-private partnerships.
Yeah, next to you, please.
Yeah, I'll go back a little bit to what I mentioned before around that analysis power of Place West that I talked about. And again, that's where we really looked at, how can we cite clean energy but how can clean energy infrastructure be cited in a way that's really going to minimize any conflicts, for example, with species movement, and avoid sensitive natural lands and avoid community impacts, equally important. So we did this analysis, and Steve, thanks for your kind words about that. And of course, for the partnership of the Tech Council. But now to really implement that, that's going to be a classic example of partnerships, right? The Nature Conservancy we're not a utility that's making siting decisions. We're not a corporation that's deciding where and how to procure their energy. We're not a government agency that has leverage over those things. So we've shown that it can be done, that we can get to scale and do it in a way that is environmentally will avoid the most impacts. But it's going to take a range of partnerships to do this at scale. And really, it's unprecedented. I think when we're looking at this transition, and we can talk more about this, it's a massive transition to a clean energy economy. And so again, it sounds nice to say, well, yes, we all want to do partnership, but it's essential. To get to the type of transition at scale that we're talking about and in time, it's going to be essential that all of us work together on that.
Maren, can I get your thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's going to be essential because we all have our own parts to play and our roles to play, and together we will get through this more holistically. I could give an example how important this public-private partnerships will be for the Governor's Office of Resiliency and from our state agencies. Those rebate programs that I was mentioning earlier, the ones for the energy efficiency savings and also for the efficient electrification rebates. The success of those rebate programs are going to be in large part dependent upon cohesive, strong public-private partnerships. And so to that end, we're really already starting conversations with the contractors who are going to implement these measures, businesses across the state, utilities, nonprofits, and all of the different entities that play their particular part in this ecosystem, so that we can all work together, as Daniel had said.
Dan, let me move to a new topic. Although we've discussed some of the strengths that Arizona has when it comes to clean energy currently and moving forward in the future, just to show how old I am and how long I've covered issues like this in Arizona. When Janet Napolitano was governor, there's a quote that just sticks in my head, and not to take us veer us off too far, but this stuck in my head, which is she wanted Arizona to be the Saudi Arabia of solar. Obviously, we're not just talking about solar; we're talking about all sorts of clean energy in this panel discussion. But what are some of the obvious factors in Arizona that really should make us a leader when it comes to this? In addition to the leadership of the three of you, what are some factors that are just, yes, we should do this because it's so natural that Arizona has some jumping off points that maybe advantages that other states don't have, frankly?
Yeah, well, certainly I think solar is the place to start there. So we are currently ranked 5th nationally for the amount of installed solar we have, and certain rankings we're probably the 2nd highest solar potential, just behind Nevada. So certainly, the solar potential of the state is immense, and that's a really good place to start. We've done a lot there, but there's a lot more potential upside, certainly on the solar side. I think, as Steve mentioned too, it's also really important to note that we're on a trajectory on the utility side where utility emissions generally are decreasing, and our utilities will play an outsized role in really helping us achieve net zero emissions by 2050. All the large utilities do have aggressive plans for carbon reduction. Certainly, we all need to work in collaboration with them, ensure they're accountable to meeting those goals, and continue to help them understand that customers and companies are wanting and needing that clean energy. But the trend on the utility side is moving in a positive direction. So that really positions us well to further build off of that. And then, there's a range of things I think that we certainly want to spend a little time on. And certainly we have our academic sector here is really a leader in a lot of innovation and research related to clean energy. And of course, the economy is already really very much intertwined when, all the things Steve talked about in terms of battery manufacturing, electric vehicle. We are very much already, I think, well positioned to further become a leader in that. So we do have a lot going for us. We have a lot going for us here in Arizona.
Steve, you want to jump on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have about 308 solar companies in Arizona today. We have more photons hitting Arizona than any other state in the United States. Those 308 companies employ about 3,000 people today. One of the most important things about the IRA is the number of jobs it's going to create. I mean, nationally, but particularly in Arizona. So I think, as Daniel mentioned, our academic institutions are playing an important role. You've seen them take up major initiatives around water and energy and hydrogen. I think, and we've been talking too much about it today, but hydrogen is going to be a very important fuel to this state in the future. And the Nature Conservancy's plan shows that. And we could become an exporter of hydrogen, for instance, to California, where there's going to be incredible demand. We're an exporter today of power. Nevada is now exporting some solar energy to Arizona. Well, it will be. There was a line siting approved to move solar energy from New Mexico to Arizona. So we've got to distribute this power. That's an important part of it. We can all envision a pipeline between Arizona and California in the future. And so, another major asset that we have is that we have spaces underground that are perfectly designed, if you will, to store hydrogen. And that's going to be a very important thing. If you're producing a lot of hydrogen, you've got to store it. The other interesting thing is all those battery companies we talked about earlier makes solar so much more feasible than it had been historically, because now you're able to produce that power using solar, and store it in batteries and use it when you need it. So that's really a game changer in this industry. It's been happening now for a few years, but it's going to become prolific as we move forward.
Aaron, before we move on, any other strengths or assets as far as Arizona is concerned right now when it comes to this space?
Oh, absolutely. Solar, obviously, I think that everyone loves solar. We're in Arizona, we all love sun. I'll also add, though, we have some good wind resources right here in the state. In fact, I'm late in about a couple hours. I'm going to be traveling with Governor Hobbs up to Winslow to attend a ribbon cutting for the state's largest wind power plant on I think it's the state's largest working cattle ranch. So it's going to be a really great example of how various industries, very, very different industries, frankly, can coexist and even support each other and thrive. So we have wind that I think also needs to be looked at in greater detail. We've got a really untapped energy efficiency resource. I think that's one of the great things. We do have an energy efficiency resource standard. Arizona has been a leader in this, and it's a technology that it's a least cost technology. It can be implemented to help save you, the consumer, money. And it also provides resiliency benefits to the grid. It increases the comfort of your home or your business. I think there's so much opportunity in energy efficiency. We kind of forget about that as an opportunity. So I kind of just beat that drum quite a bit. We have geothermal here in Arizona. We have so much diversity here in Arizona. It's really wonderful. We're also really well positioned on the grid. Our position in the Southwest near New Mexico, or between New Mexico, between California, and then above us, we've got a lot of hydro that we can really pull from all of these different resources so that can also balance the grid and improve reliability and resilience in the grid. And so I think as we all kind of work towards a more regional grid, I think we're going to see a lot of benefits from that. And then I will just say that there's been an enormous amount of local government and community leadership in this space already. It's been wonderful to see all of the work that's already being done, like I said, by town, by city councils, community-based groups, local business groups. They've really led in this space. And so we're excited as the Office of Resiliency to come in and really just support and expand and exponentially, magnify the benefits and the value that they're bringing in this space for Arizona. So I think there's probably a lot more that I could say about that, but I think Arizona is really well positioned. So,
a couple of things that Maren said kicked off some ideas. One, the Salt River and the Verde River are now completely full, right? They're at capacity. So the amount of hydro that we can derive from that system is incredible right now. We have some issues with the Colorado River, but that's been mitigated a little bit by last year's snow and now the snow melt. But I think hydro will continue to play such an important role, and it's also relatively carbon-free, not completely, but relatively carbon-free. And I think that's an important asset that we don't talk about. And then, we still have the largest nuclear power plant in the world in Palo Verde. That's just outside of Phoenix, producing a massive amount of power and again, very little carbon. So those are important assets that we have that are relatively carbon free.
And did you want to jump on there for a moment before I redirect?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that's been said. And I think I'll maybe just go back to a point a little while ago that Steve made about, this incredible pairing of battery storage and now solar potential, and how new that is. I've been with in this role in a lead role with the Conservancy for about 8 years. And I mean, even if you just look back to that point, in some of these discussions, when we kind of thought about what might be possible in terms of a clean energy transition, and I agree entirely with Maren, there's a lot more besides solar, and our modeling looks at all options to get to a clean energy economy and to get to net zero. So it's certainly not just solar, but I think it is quite applicable to us in Arizona to think about solar and batteries together and how new that is. And I think, we're really still all trying to really understand what is the potential of that, and how quickly the technology in all likelihood will continue to improve on that. And, the types of things that are possible now in terms of how do we power our economy, the cost basis for those is changing rapidly, and largely because battery storage technology is changing so quickly. So it's really a really exciting time, and it's very, very, very new. I mean, I think Steve said, and we're talking in some cases the last just few years that this technology is really changing.
Yeah, and I'll have a big picture question I want to ask all of you as we get closer to the end here. But when it comes to having the economic benefits, while also having either environmental benefits or at least not damaging the environment, first of all, how important is that? I suppose that's a fairly obvious question, but what are the challenges behind that to make sure? And we've seen in all sorts of different places, what is the balance of making sure that humans can get some of these good jobs that you and Maren and Steve have all talked about, while also making sure that the environment that we all love and rely on in Arizona is not hurt by it?
Well, workforce development is going to be an incredibly important aspect of this. And there is funding within the IRA to support workforce development, but developing a new generation of workforce that are battery technicians, that a couple photovoltaic companies have recently moved operations to Arizona. So we're actually going to be making solar panels here in Arizona. You need a workforce for that. So I think the community colleges have shown how resilient they are in building these programs. Lucid and Nikola are an example of that, where Central Arizona College developed a workforce plan and actually developed the workforce for both of those facilities. We had no electric vehicle manufacturing capability prior to that. I think you're going to see the same thing here, is that the community colleges, the four-year institutions, CTE programs in high schools will all play a role in developing the next generation of talent to fuel these relatively new industries. New capabilities are going to be required. And, we have one of the best community college systems in the United States. We've got world-class four-year institutions. So I think there's going to be a massive opportunity both for job creation and providing that workforce necessary to fuel the future industry.
Thanks, Steve. And Dan, what about when it comes to, again, the economic benefits, to make sure that doesn't hurt the environment in some way?
Yeah, I mean, obviously certainly that's the angle that we come at it from as a Conservancy, but I think it's really where most people, when they really become, as certainly, for example, as customers are looking at clean energy, they want to see that energy coming in ways that are not going to have negative environmental impacts. And so I think that's, as you get thoughtful about this, that's where most people kind of come to. And, I think it's important to really understand the scope of what we're talking about here. When we talk about transitioning to a clean energy economy, getting to net zero by 2050. This is a really major, frankly, societal change that we're talking about. And, it's kind of on par with the development of the interstate highway system in the US, in that we're talking about just this massive amount of infrastructure. And, the highway system created, really the country we have today. It also created a lot of legacy problems. Certainly it tore communities apart. Certainly it had all kinds of issues for fragmenting wildlife habitat. So, these things, this is at that level of scope and scale. And so what we have the opportunity now is to really learn from that and to say, if we do this with thoughtful approach and with science and with some of the mapping that we've done and that others have done, we can do this in a way that will minimize those negative impacts of it. Some calculations are that if we look at, again, getting out to 2050, the net present value of that investment is $260 billion in the West. That's what it's going to take to get us to a clean energy future. Even if we site things really well, we're still talking about over 20 million acres of infrastructure and transmission, which is the size of some states that we're talking about. So these are big numbers, and the scope is really significant. So I think, yes, absolutely, we can get there, we can do this. And we can do it again in a way that will minimize those wildlife and nature related challenges. And I think all of us really want to do that. It will require a really thoughtful approach to do that and require some really careful mapping and analysis of different options and different trade-offs.
Aaron, how does state government look into that as far as making sure that the economy is thriving and that Arizona is a leader in clean energy, but also making sure that, again, the natural resources aren't hurt by this?
I really appreciate this question, Steve. I think there is a balance to be had here. These are things that need to be looked at. We can't go forward, without looking at the different impacts of our actions. So I absolutely agree there needs to be a balance between clean energy and conservation as we go through this massive transition, as Dan just talked about. And it's important to minimize the negative impacts. But I think it's also important to look at the cost of inaction and the lives lost, the property damage, the opportunities missed. It's massive, and there have been many studies looking at the cost of inaction, and unfortunately I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but it's billions of dollars, and it very much outweighs the cost of action. I'll also add that there are the benefits of clean energy. For instance, I do have the numbers for a study that was conducted looking at, it found that there would be 60,000 negative health benefit or avoided negative health benefits from the IIJA and the IRA funding by 2030. So that's emergency room visits missed or not taken. That's asthma attacks that did not happen. Those are heart attacks that did not happen. So that is in itself an economic benefit as well. And then I'll just drilling it down to a more specific program. I think it was the IIJA has a clean electric bus program, and several of our schools around the state have pursued that funding and have gotten funding to transition their buses from their fuel to electric buses, and there are no emissions. And there's studies that have been done showing that students sitting on those buses are subject to significant harmful health impacts. Again, asthma, breathing issues, respiratory illnesses, susceptibility. And then now if they're on an electric bus, that they're not subject to those. So there, in addition, there's an educational benefit to clean energy in that way. So there are numerous ways of seeing the enormous economic benefits of clean energy. And again, conservation, we live in an absolutely gorgeous, just stunning state, and we need to protect our landscapes. And I am very thankful that there are groups like the Nature Conservancy that have done very thoughtful work looking at where are the best places to site specific, utility scale resources, clean energy resources. in ways that really minimize cultural impacts and environmental impacts, because we do need to be thoughtful as we go forward.
If I could, I agree with that
Go ahead,
entirely.
Dan.
Just real quick, just say, yes, entirely. And, I think I mentioned before our study, just, in terms of cost of inaction, right? Just Phoenix metro area, just heat, over $2 billion annually by 2050. So entirely agree with that point. I think, to us, I would say, I would also agree that when we think kind of about a thoughtful approach, I think that will allow us to get there more quickly, because what it will do is avoid conflicts upfront. So if we can agree on the appropriate place to site utility scale infrastructure, or to influence a corporate procurement decision, right, that doesn't have any of these conflicts, you're not going to have the conflict, so that's good from a conservation, wildlife, habitat perspective, but you'll also get it online more quickly. So then, being tied up in years of negotiation and litigation and conflict and things like that. So I think it's a little bit of, by doing some of that mapping and systematic approach up front, our hope certainly is that we can get these things online more quickly, because, I would certainly agree entirely that the cost of inaction is huge and really untenable.
Steve, again, Maren triggered another thought around electric buses. So one of the things, we haven't talked a lot about grid resiliency today, but one of the things that electric vehicles of all kinds do is they provide an opportunity for us to use solar to generate power and provide it back to the grid. And we can use long haul trucks like Nikola has, we can use buses, we can use our own vehicles to help support the grid when it needs it most, and we don't. So there's a massive opportunity to really address that issue that a lot of people are concerned about going forward because of the increased demand, just through the use of electric vehicles and batteries, and giving back, if you will, to the grid.
Steve, one of the things I wanted to follow up with you on, though, is when you mentioned earlier some of the corporations that are trying to do their own to make sure that they're either ahead of the pack, or they're not being told exactly what to do by a government entity or a state, and say, in order to come here, you have to do this. So on a positive note, how encouraging is that? We talk about what Dan and Maren said in terms of whether it's citing things or transitioning into more solar or other sort of clean energy options, when those companies, at least some of them that are considering coming to Arizona or who would like to, are not necessarily putting up a fight on these things. They actually realize how attractive a state Arizona is, and rather than rocking the boat, they want to make sure that what they're providing potentially really fits in well with what Arizona's priorities are, both citizens and government.
Well, first of all, companies come here for a whole variety of reasons, right? Business climate, relatively low cost energy. We're number 2 in data centers in the United States, and data centers consume more power than any other entity on Earth. And so, there's a lot of good reason. Relatively low taxes, great lifestyle, so on and so forth. But as I said, increasingly, either through their civic commitment, or through messages they're getting from shareholders and employees, they're really stepping up when it comes to a carbon-free future. And these technology and manufacturing companies tend to be ahead of the curve anyway, just by the nature of their organization. They're very innovative. And so for instance, Intel has a stake in the ground when they're going to be at zero, not only zero water consumption, but they'll be producing more water than they consume. A lot of people don't understand how you do that, but you can actually take water out of desert air. Not a lot of it, but you can. They've got people that wake up every day. All they care about is the sustainability of that organization in the community. And a lot of these ESG folks are reporting right directly to the leadership of these organizations. So there's a a massive commitment, and the timing couldn't be better, right? It fits right with our move in this direction, with the funding that's become available, a sort of cultural, social shift and set of these things. So I think it portends a great future for Arizona as a country.
Maren, I wanted to ask you one political question. I'll ask it very gently. In that, when it comes to moving forward, I mean, Dan cited the survey indicating 80% or so of Arizonans want clean energy, think clean energy is a wonderful thing for the state to be focused on. Is this one of those issues, I'm knocking on wood when I say this, that there can be more bipartisanship, more cooperation as we look forward toward Arizona's future? Is that something that Hobbs administration, or just generally, are you getting, in the few months you've been in the position, does this seem like something that that business and government can work together on, but also Democrats, independents, and Republicans can work on together?
Yeah, I'll say, since I started in this position, I have heard nothing but enormous widespread support and excitement for Governor Hobbs's establishment of the Office of Resiliency. And this is coming from all sectors across the state, in so many industries. It's been really a little bit of a relief, I think. I think there has been a real desire to see something like this for a while now, and thankfully, Governor Hobbs established this office with the vision to make sure that Arizona has a future for everyone. And I'll add that in addition to there are many polls. The Nature Conservancy's polls, absolutely. We've seen polls across the board, bipartisan support for clean air, clean water, clean, affordable public transportation. These are all things that really contribute to positive quality of life. They attract higher quality businesses and jobs. They attract families that want to raise children here. So I think it's hard to say, like, you're anti-clean water, particularly in Arizona. And I think that with that understanding that this is an opportunity for us to improve our air quality, our water quality, and many other aspects. But yeah, I see hope and possibility here for sure.
Steve, can I add to that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. We have been advocating, we, the Arizona Tech Council, have been advocating for many years for reestablishing the former governor shut it down. And so we were delighted when the governor created this Office of Resiliency. Maren has a much bigger job, by the way. She covers energy, water, and land use. Pretty important to everything we've been talking about.
Those are pretty small things, Maren. Good job.
Yeah. And, what I would say is that she's been incredibly accessible from day one, and out there in the community, talking to people, listening to people. Incredible to work with. A couple of things that I would like to see the state do, and Maren and I have discussed this. I mentioned earlier that the IRA requires a lot of matching funds. We think the state should have a stake, and we should see some of that funding in the next budget to be able to match the federal funds. And for many years, along with an energy office, is a state energy plan, right? Something that takes us into this future we're all talking about today. We have plans for so many other things, right? And that plan should be developed by all the stakeholders using a similar process that Dan and his firm have used on all the work that they've done, bringing the utilities, the consumer, every stakeholder that's part of that process. It's so important to our future. Hundreds of companies in the pipeline right now looking to come to Arizona. The two things we're going to need more than anything else going forward to support that is energy and water. So having a statewide plan, I think, is going to be critical to that future.
Steve, as we wrap up, I want to give Dan the final thoughts here. Dan, we have about a minute or so left. Either a reminder to folks or something we didn't get to you want to get in.
Well, first, I'll just say too how thrilled we are. First of all, Maren, thanks for being on the call today, but also for your office is so critical, not only for helping us take advantage of the federal funding that's available, but for all the reasons that we've discussed today. So we're very excited about that. No, I think I guess maybe I would just say kind of in a final thought from my side is that, again, I mean, we certainly talked about it from the political side, but we also see it from the public and private side of how much shared interest there is around these topics, around clean energy, around a thriving economy, around moving these things forward together, and the importance of clean air and clean water. And we've never had a shortage, and now even less so, of interested corporations, public sector agencies, community groups that all want to work together on this issue. So, that does, while these challenges really are massive, it does give me a lot of hope in kind of how much shared will there really appears to be to move some of these really necessary and innovative things forward.
We'll close there. That is all for this morning's scoop presented by the Arizona Capital Times. We've been discussing Arizona's roadmap to clean energy. Thanks again to our distinguished panelists, Dan Steller, State Director of the Nature Conservancy, Arizona, Maren Mahoney, Director of the Arizona Office of Resiliency, and Steve Zylstra, President and CEO of the Arizona Technology Council. Steve Goldstein, thank you all for participating. Thanks to everybody who's been watching. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.